I've been listening to a book about rabies. It's pretty wild, but I don't think a lot of the claims hold water.
Took me a second there. It's fear of water.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. All right. I was like, wait a second.
there we go.
Tiger Balm. Where once we wondered what was beyond the sea, we eventually set our eyes to the stars above. When these voyages end, where does our need to understand expand? The Discovery asks, what would humanity do if we knew there was overwhelming evidence that there was life beyond death? Have no fear. Jason Segel is in his finest sweater to guide us through these tough metaphysical questions and more. For all things that make you feel sad, bad, and just generally not rad, this is Existential Shred.
Content warning. The Discovery as a whole deals with a lot of discussion of self-deletion, I'll call it. So if that's something that you'd rather not listen to, by all means, we'll see you next time. Just real quick, I guess, would you recommend this movie, Levi?
If it's something that you can stomach, the topic, I do think I like this movie a lot. It's why I suggested it for the cast. I do think it's a good movie. I think it really touches on some interesting theoreticals, and I think it's worth looking at. I think it's worth looking into.
This was the first time I watched it, and I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, even knowing that it's kind of up my alley in terms of like the questions it's asking and what it's looking to kind of explore topic wise. But yeah, if you can kind of stomach, like you said, the general themes that it's going to deal with, then I think it's worth it. Outside of that, if you need to duck out now, we'll see you next time. But if not, we can get into it proper.
The Discovery. This was co-written by Charlie McDowell and directed by Charlie McDowell. For those who don't know who he is the son of a pretty big actor, Malcolm McDowell, who was known for A Clockwork Orange.
Okay.
Yeah, Alex in A Clockwork Orange. He's the main character. He's also, his mother is Mary Steenburgen, who's in this movie. She plays the interviewer in the beginning.
Oh wow, the woman from Step Brothers.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I like her. She's always good in everything.
She's a very good actress.
Yeah, it was weird that because she's one of the first people you see, and it was interesting that she's in for such a short amount of time. But it makes sense if she's his mom.
During the filming of this, he had the chance to not only direct his mother, but his girlfriend at the time was Rooney Mara.
Is she Isla?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I have seen a couple of Charlie McDowell's films. This one, and then the one he did after this called Windfall, which also features Jason Segel and Jesse Plemons.
That sounds familiar, but
it's on Netflix as well. It was a lot of his stuff goes straight to Netflix. I don't know if he has some sort of contract with them or
he has the Adam Sandler contract where he got a $1 jillion to make 3 movies
for his family.
Yeah.
My family needs jobs. But we have a pretty good cast in general in this too. Again, Jason Segel plays the main character. Rooney Mara is co-main character. We have Robert Redford, Riley Coe, who is she was, what was her name in that? Lacey.
Oh yeah.
Elvis's granddaughter.
No kidding.
Yeah, so Elvis Presley's granddaughter.
Interesting.
Yep. And we get again Jesse Plemons, who he's good in everything that I've ever seen him in.
Yeah, he rules. Even in stuff I don't like. Like I kind of think of. I was watching it and I was thinking of
the adaptation of
what the hell I'm thinking of Ending Things, which I guess thematic with the movie The Discovery, but I was like, man, he was so good in that, but that movie just was not for me. As much as I love the book, that movie was not for me.
Having read the book, which you suggested to me, and then watching the movie, I believe Charlie Kaufman directed that.
Yeah, he tried to be real theatrical.
I think that it's a hard book to adapt in general, but I couldn't imagine adapting it properly.
It'd be tough. I mean, he gave it he people love that movie, so like he did it well, but just not for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jesse, he's anything he's in, he's very good.
Yeah, very good actor. A lot of very good actors in this.
You took away one of my jokes already by going over the cast.
Crap.
No, because I was as I was watching Dr. Harbour, the Jason Segel's dad in the film, I was like, who is that? I like he looked familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it, and I was gonna call him Charlton Heston at some point, but you already said he's Robert Redford, so that's whatever.
Damn. Oh, well.
Fine.
That's fun. But we get into the film, and right off the bat, we talked about, there's an interview with Dr. Harbour, and the film really sets you up in the beginning and just like drops this knowledge on you. Just, this is the world that we live in now. And the idea is that Dr. Harbour has found evidence that there is some form of life, or there's an afterlife, essentially.
Yeah, he is a scientist, and the way that they kind of explain it, which I'm fine most of the time with as much ambiguity as the storyteller wants to have. I would be perfectly fine if they just didn't even have that interview section where they're trying to explain it, and just like, this is how it is. But yeah, they explain it as he's hesitant to say life after death, but he calls it a new plane of existence, and the evidence for it is he captured brainwaves leaving the body after death. And that's the entirety of the premise, is that is the discovery.
And what this ends up leading to is that just a string of suicides, not mass suicides, but like you said it earlier, self-deletions. Like, people, a suicide toll is rising. People are killing themselves. They feel that they're getting a second chance. They might be going to somewhere that's better than where they're at. And with the overwhelming evidence that he's provided, people have an out from their situations that they're in.
Yeah, it's to the point where there's a lot of really interesting, and this is where, like, if you can stomach the topic at hand, there is a lot of really interesting discussion to be had, and I think they do pretty well at having those discussions. Like, one of the things that you kind of grapple with throughout is the morality of it all. No, if you know with overwhelming evidence, is suicide seen as an immoral act or like an unethical act at that point, because you're not it's not a purely destructive act. And it's to the point where it's kind of culturally, I don't want to say accepted, but it's culturally normative, where in most of the places, like the set pieces, like the boat initially, hospitals, there's all these different set pieces, they have a
ticker.
Yeah. That says, like, you know, something along the lines of like choose
life.
Choose
life
your
over
life.
The afterlife,
something.
Essentially.
Yeah, but it has the ticker for how many people en masse have committed suicide after the discovery.
To touch on the interview scene still a little bit, I do think that was an important scene. Like you said, you could do without it. I don't think it's as important to like explain what's going on in the world as much as we do have a spot like right at the end of that scene where one of the people working with the interview crew gets up and he says, "Thank you for a chance at a second life." Now, a question that she had asked him during that interview is, "Do you feel responsible?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he just says no.
He says no, but after that happens and the guy shoots himself, but the shock on his face, I feel like that's the first time that he actually witnessed it. And I think that really affected him a lot more than what he let on.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I kind of some of the background I have with like studying like psychology, philosophy, stuff like that in an academic setting, there's a lot of really interesting questions that you pick up on immediately where like I wrote down, is this science versus existentialism? Is this science versus science? Is this science versus psychology? Is this science versus mysticism? Because in some degrees, like with what you're discussing, it feels like it's science versus science,
Mm-hmm.
where or science versus kind of the lived experience of human being, because from a very objective standpoint, and that's a big theme, is like objectivity. Um, we keep using, and because we know the implication of it in the movie, is overwhelming evidence. And one of the things is like Jason Segel talks about, something like this shouldn't have overwhelming evidence. It should have definitive evidence.
Yeah.
And to that point, when someone posits something scientifically like that, where it's like, yeah, there's an afterlife, there's a separation between the claim and the implication practically. So yeah, that was the first time he probably was directly impacted by his discovery, and the difference of like, no, those people acted of their own volition, as opposed to someone being like, I'm doing this because of you, thank you.
Yeah.
It's probably it probably did shift a
Yeah.
little bit. I can agree with that. I think that's fair.
I think we, after that point, fast forward 2 years. I think it said.
No, I think the interview is the year of after the discovery,
Okay.
and then we fast forward one more year to
Okay.
the second anniversary.
Yeah. I watched it a week ago again to prepare for this, and then, like I said, I was actually so much more like, I think it was the second time I watched it, and I was like keyed in on it again, and I kind of forgot to write some stuff down here and there, but
No, you're good. I actually wrote, I think, like 3 full pages of notes, just because I was really engaged with it.
yeah.
Yeah.
We cut to the ferry that you were mentioning earlier. It's and it seems that it's just Jason Segel's character, whose name is Will. I can't recall what he goes by with his last name.
He initially goes by Will Stevenson.
Will Stevenson. He's on the ferry by himself. He walks in, sits down. There's all this talk about the discovery. He just kind of gets fed up with it and turns off the TV. We meet our second main character, who's just kind of like not anywhere visibly seen. She's like, I was listening to that. She sits up in a seat, and he's like, oh, all right. But we start seeing instantly just kind of like, he just walks over and sits next to her, and it's very odd to her, which, random stranger, right? That is kind of an odd thing to do. But this is in a weird way, this is a movie about this horrible thing. This is also just kind of oddly a love story set within this world.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think one of the things they did really like admirably is they didn't dedicate a lot of screen time to that. Like
Yeah.
it's definitely at play, but I think more than a love story, and there's a scene later that I want to highlight that I think kind of drives this home, is with a movie dealing with a topic such as this, it's more about the power of like human connection and vulnerability than it is just like that kind of romantic love.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it is strange. Like in this, I don't know if this was super intentional, but like because the amount of people who have given up to the discovery isn't super significant, but like throughout the movie, it seems pretty like barren. Like there's not really a lot of
It's empty.
there's not really a lot of people. So like it could be seen as a weird thing for him to just walk up to her on the ferry, but then it's like, I mean, if they're not used to having like human connection at that point, is it really that unfounded that, if two people are around each other, they're just gonna
Be drawn to each other.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I was thinking about that too, or like it, like you said, seems barren, seems empty. It even like, I think it would depend on where you live too. Like, if you're somewhere out and it's not a very populated place to begin with, it's probably not going to be a lot of people if the death toll is as high as it is. Now, if you're in like New York City, chances are you'll still be running into a lot of people.
Yeah, and you know what I thought about just now is they do say, because they're in like a coastal, I'm gonna guess like a Maine
Yeah.
like East Coast kind of. They do say it's the off season, so there's not that many people there, which
Yeah.
could probably
That's true.
assist in that.
Yeah. But they start talking. She's a very quirky girl. Just seems very jaded in general. I mean, I feel a lot of people would be kind of in this world, maybe a little jaded. They get a lot of discussion. Like, they introduce each other. He says his name's Will, and she gets into the whole, like, oh, well, usually people look like they're named by a certain age. And I think that's a funny conversation, too, because, like, that is something I think as well. When you meet somebody and you're just like, well, I wouldn't expect his name to be Pete. He doesn't look like a Pete to me. You don't really hear those conversations that much, like in movies, where it's just something that the dialogue seemed very natural to me. Just like having two two people having a conversation in general.
Yeah, and it is purposeful.
Yeah.
Because, and like ironically, she's like, you don't look like a Will, with the irony being his name, he says his name is Will Stevenson, and we quickly find out he is not Will Stevenson.
Yeah,
so he
Will
does
Harbor.
Yeah, he is the son of the scientist who made the discovery. So when she says you don't look like your name, she's not technically incorrect.
No, I didn't think about that either.
Yeah.
She introduces herself as Isla, and when it gets to that point too, he's like, do you think you look like an Isla? It's like, well, yeah, she's the only one she knows. Probably the only one she knows. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a very common name. Also, I was like, all right. They have their little conversation, a little back and forth, like somewhat messing with each other too. Is she having issues with seasickness, and he just pulls pills out of his pocket, gives it to her, and she's like, another one of the funniest things to me. She's like, do I just look like somebody who takes pills from a stranger, and then just takes them?
Yeah. He you can tell for a moment he's like, oh yeah, I guess it is weird.
Yeah.
And then as he's saying that, she's just popping the pill, and he's like, oh, all right.
Again, she seems like more of the kind of like a free-spirited type of person in general. I really like Rooney Mara as an actress also. I always have. She was in she played the main female lead in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo also, the American.
I never saw it.
It's good. I wish they would have kept doing it, because the book series and the Norwegian films do really, really well, and the American one had Daniel Craig and her in it, and I thought it was really, really good. Mm-hmm. But she does a really good job in just about everything I've seen her in. She's also Rooney family, right? So that's a Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah. Wait, is she actually related to?
Yeah, she and her and Kate Mara are related to Art Rooney.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
All right, this is the greatest movie of all time, then.
So yeah, she's part of the Rooney Mara. Maras were, I think, from New York, but Rooney's from Pittsburgh, and big business centers, sports centers.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I'm learning so much today.
Yeah.
And you said you didn't do any research.
Well, this is stuff I know just because I'm me.
But yeah, so ferry scene happens. They're both kind of hanging out, waiting for people to pick them up. And this is where, for me, you kind of get the contrast between, I'm just going to call it like existential, just being, which you see with Isla, where she is just existing. She is human being. She is experiencing life as it comes to her. Jason Segel at this point we see him as a very cut, dry, no gray area, science-minded person. He discusses,
very objective and logical.
Yeah, he says that he's a neurologist, so we can understand he is speaking from a specific perspective. And one of the first times you really see that contrast between them is they're waiting for someone to pick them up. Isla's like sticking her thumb out trying to just hitchhike, and he's like, that's going to take so much longer than you think it will. And someone like immediately picks her up, and he's just like, well, I didn't factor into the equation that you're an attractive woman. And it's like, the way that he thinks is so like formulaic. It's very like, there's factors, there's variables, there's all these things, whereas she is just kind of existing.
Go with the flow.
Yeah. And that's a big theme throughout, that you kind of see her break that within him. especially as the movie goes on, like a lot occurs, but like you see them together, like you said, in that like kind of more the love story that emerges. They kind of break each other down in that sense, or like build each other up. Really, it's not really like they're breaking each other down, but
and like I can just imagine too, like with him saying that, like that's gonna take so much longer. He's just thinking, like, if I was hitchhiking, like nobody's picking me up. I'm like a 6'3" like giant dude who's just like
I'd have the an eternal frown on my face.
Yeah, a big pea coat and a turtleneck.
Yeah. I'm just passing out pills.
Yeah, not the person you'd want to pick up on the side of the road.
Yeah. But then our boy Jesse, also known as Toby, pulls up in the pickup truck. He is Will's brother.
He's in a big yellow jumpsuit.
Which I didn't think of anything at first. Honestly, when at first, and I can imagine most people going into this might have a similar thought process, is they arrived on a ferry. It's a coastal town. He shows up in like a bright yellow jumper. I was like, oh, he's a fisherman, or he's a dock worker. Not so much.
No. We find as they're driving back through the town, he's taking them to their dad's house, which is this hidden giant like old boarding school turned mansion. I think they said it was a center for what do you call them? Disturbed youths.
Yeah, it's like a summer camp for delinquents.
That was
or something along those lines. And the joke that Toby says is like, "Yeah, I never got it. If they were such bad kids, why'd they get such a cool place to stay for the summer?"
Well, you get a giant fucking mansion.
Yeah.
This is where we find out that they are staying on this compound. It's essentially like we look at it and go like, "Oh, this is a fucking cult." Mm-hmm. They have yellow jumpers, gray jumpers, red jumpers. It's all for a different level of authority and access to different parts of the mansion.
Yeah, it's essentially the Star Trek system.
Yeah. We find that he is returning home because his dad invited him, or Toby invited him. He finally answered a phone call from him, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact. He comes home.
Yeah, essentially, his dad, Dr. Harbour, is kind of having another breakthrough with the discovery itself. That's what we come to learn. He kind of walks in and they have him under, essentially, and they're simulating death to try to record what is happening when he dies.
Yeah, whereas before, the evidence that they have is some kind of measurable understanding of like brainwaves leaving the body. They now are looking to have like tangible, like recorded video evidence of wherever you go after death.
So we see Dr. Harbour is hooked up to this machine. He's got all these different electrodes on his head. So where we get introduced to the character Lacey, also, who is played by Riley Keough. It's Ko or Q? It's like K-E. I don't know how it's pronounced, but Keough. Yeah, whatever.
I'm sure she won't be
I
offended.
think it's just cough. Again, I've seen her in a few things. She was in Devil All the Time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she played one of the two people that always picked up hitchhikers and then took pictures with them and then ended up killing them.
Oh, it's been a while since I've seen that.
Very good actress and everything I've seen her in as well. But she's kind of an assistant to Dr. Harbour. It seems like she clearly was a scientist at some point before too. She knows her way around all the machines that they're operating. And then we're introduced to, I forget the character's name, but
Cooper.
Yeah, who seems like he's worked with Dr. Harbour for quite some time, because he immediately was like, "Oh, it's good to see you again," and he's consistently talking into this voice recorder.
Yeah, which they don't outright say what he's doing, but I guess the implication is he's probably trying to communicate with someone who has passed on, or he's doing something, because they don't outright say why he's doing that.
No, it's a very odd character in that sense. I wasn't sure if it was to do that, or if maybe he was chronicling the experiments themselves so that he could maybe write like a book
like
about
a
it later.
documentarian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also kind of figured because the compound that they're on, it's people who have been affected by the discovery. So it's people who probably have like a lot of like anguish and are going through a lot of grief and have like varying degrees of probably illness.
People who have had loved ones that have passed on because of the discovery, or even maybe have tried it themselves and then have regret.
Yeah, and I kind of there's a lot of different things that you could read into his like constant recording, and I was also willing to just be like, oh, he's not all there based because of something that happened.
I think there's even kind of the scene where him and Lacey are sitting next to each other, and he's talking to that, and she even makes a point to acknowledge at one point. She's like, "I can't ever tell if you're talking to me or that."
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that also could kind of lead to what you said too, like trying to talk to somebody else beyond, because why wouldn't you just be like, I can't tell if you're talking to me or just recording yourself?
Yeah.
The compound is, again, like, it's very sectioned off for some people.
Mm-hmm.
It's there for people who have been affected. It's also hidden so that people can't just come find Dr. Harbour and try to. I think the interview in the beginning was the reason why he had kind of put himself in hiding. I know that they kind of like said that I think they experienced death threats and stuff in the past. So like they bought a new place, just go off the grid. They're finding out that they're trying to record stuff. They start doing more kind of tests with Dr. Harbour and basically are like, we can't keep doing this to you. One of these days you're going to go under and you're not going to come back.
Yeah, which Will being a neurologist, he looks at like brain scans because he's been Dr. Harbour has been going under, for lack of a better term. They say like he usually does that for 15 seconds at a time, but the longest he's done is for a minute. So obviously that's going to have some effect on the brain. And Will is looking at brain scans of him, and he tells him, yeah, if you do this again, like, you're not coming back. I'm surprised you've lasted this long, which kind of sets up what occurs from this point on. But I guess before we really get into the shenanigans that occur, yeah, we get a lot of really, really emotionally heavy dialogue between Will and Dr. Harbour at this point, because you start to get some insight into the discovery itself and what occurred around it. Earlier, we didn't mention, but on the ferry, Isla and Will are talking about the discovery itself, and Will tells her, when I was young, I died for a minute. When I came back, I told my mom I saw flashing lights, I saw a little boy, and I saw the beach. He tells her all this just to say, like, I made it up. Like, I just made it up. Probably it's just part of humans' need to make meaning of something. As a kid, I made it up. And then in the dialogue, once Will is back home, you understand that Will actually directly inspired Dr. Harbour making the discovery. And in different capacities. The obvious one is like, he, as a child, reported that he saw something after he had died. And then also, it seems as a neurologist, he worked with his father to make the discovery.
Yeah, it does. I think he definitely, I think it's mentioned too, whenever they do discuss stuff similar to that, but he didn't want it to get out that this was a thing. Mm-hmm. But his dad was basically like, how do you find something like this and not say something?
Yeah, which is where you mentioned it in the intro. He talks about like, it used to be we went oversea and we went over land, and then after that we went to the sky, and like the only thing we have left is to understand what happens after we die.
Yeah, and that's actually what he's doing as well, as he's putting himself, like, essentially killing himself to. He's the Christopher Columbus of the afterlife at that point, right? Like, because he's going and coming back.
Yeah,
people haven't done that since the discovery. People just die.
Yeah, and one of the things that he says, along with kind of being the what's the word I'm looking for?
Discoverer.
Yeah, the discoverer, the conduit through which all of this has happened, is when he's talking about the implication of everything that happened with Will. He says, Will, and this is where you kind of start to see him break away from that very science mind, is he says, we were wrong because of the outcome that occurred, which is very non-scientific for him, where he starts to split away from discovery for the sake of like this grand understanding of life beyond death, but he understands that it was wrong of them to question these things and make these claims because of what the implication of knowing this would be.
I think also the original intent behind it was like to be at ease that your loved ones passed. They might be in a better place. They are not definitive. Again, overwhelmingly, the evidence is that they could be in a better place. It's not definitive. They have no idea where it is. It's just a different plane of existence. But obviously the outcome wasn't, the intention wasn't, oh, we're going to do this and people are going to just off themselves to get there. It's, hey, feel like resolved in the fact that they did go somewhere.
Yeah, and this is also the conversation where we find out why that might be so important to them, because you're kind of breadcrumbed to a certain point, but it's in this moment that you find out something happened with Will's mom, Dr. Harbour's wife. You eventually come to find out she did kill herself.
Before the discovery.
You're breadcrumbed along the way, because at first you're like, oh, they just kind of drop it on you, and you're left to think, okay, she was one of the people who was affected by the discovery. But then later you find out it was before the discovery because Dr. Harbour was so engrossed in the work that he was doing that he neglected his family, and that drove her to kill herself.
Yeah, on their anniversary night.
Yeah, she made him a dinner on their anniversary. He refused to come out of his office because the implication being he was working on the discovery, and then she later that night, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but we know what happens at that point.
I think at that point too, probably just even drove him more to need to do it at that point.
Some kind of closure.
Yeah. I can't remember if we jumped past this point already or not, but the last time we saw Isla, she got in the car hitchhiking and left. Will goes to the beach that he says he saw, or the one that he told him that he saw whenever he passed. He goes back there a lot. And as he was there, he witnesses Isla just walking straight into the ocean.
Yeah, she puts like a hubcap in a backpack and then walks out.
Yeah, clearly she's attempting to go to the afterlife. But Will rushes in a very, very nice sweater.
Yeah, I was so upset he ruined that sweater.
He saved the woman's life, but
listen,
the sweater had to go.
It is officially sweater season, and that's all I can think of right now. And he had such nice sweaters throughout the whole movie, and I was just like, man, that looks so nice. That looks so comfy.
You should have become a neurologist. You could get all the sweaters you want.
I don't know. It's my biggest regret in life.
He rushes in, drags her out of the ocean, saves her. She gets pretty pissed about it. She's not happy, but he essentially talks her into just coming back to the compound with him, to where she's at this point somebody who has been affected by the discovery. She just tried to go to the afterlife. She gets introduced to Dr. Harbour himself then. Good dialogue here too, or like funny at least, where he's giving a questionnaire.
Yeah, in order to become a part of the compound, you have to do like a questionnaire, and this is a part where the ambiguity of it doesn't matter to me, because they say like you have to do the questionnaire so they can understand who you truly are on the inside, or something along those lines, but they don't ever explain how it decides whether you get in or not. But it's a lot of very personal questions.
Yeah, there's just a lot of back and forth between them, and I'm trying to remember, but she answers the questions in a way that surprises Dr. Harbour. She's
very blunt.
Yeah.
Very open and honest. Really no hesitance to just say, like, one of the questions, he's like, what's your greatest strength and your greatest weakness? And she's one of the things she says is like, I am able to understand people's emotions, but I in no way can connect with them. So it's just like these very blunt, like answers that you wouldn't expect from someone you're just meeting.
Yeah. Ultimately, she gets to stay in the compound, and I love they like give her this room. It's this tiny, just like cupboard essentially. And Will comes to like see her, and he's got like a room with a bunk bed. She's like, "All right, I'll come and sleep in your room. I'm not staying here in this small room."
Yeah, and there's right after that, when it's nighttime. There's a really, I found it to be a really like powerful scene of just dialogue between Will and Isla, and this is where I think the idea of like science versus existentialism really comes into play, because there's a very specific line of dialogue that she says that triggered that thought in me, because it goes back to a story I remember hearing in college about phenomenology and like existentialism, where they're just talking to each other, trying to get to know each other better. And he asks her, "What do you think the most difficult part of the grieving process is?" To some, in a roundabout way. And she talks about the power of like inanimate objects.
Oh yeah.
And she says, the most innate, non-consequential inanimate objects around you become that much more powerful because you've experienced loss and what they remind you of. And one of the discussions at a lecture when I was in school studying was about, there was a story about, it was a man who was in a cabin. He was waiting for his friend to arrive. They were going to drink wine and have like a hangout session basically. But the road got too snowy. It was dangerous for them to travel. And his friend called him and said, "I'm not going to be able to make it tonight, drink without me." And in that moment, you look at the bottle of wine and it's just a bottle of wine. There's no real emotion connected to it. Yeah. But when you have these experiences where you emotionally attach some meaning to an object, it becomes more than just the object itself. And I thought it was really interesting to kind of, for them to touch on that so specifically, because like it's a really powerful thing for people who have grieved. They understand that practically, but it's not really something that is really talked about in that way.
And she was talking about too, like how much she hated the coffee table or something. Like,
yeah, that was
like,
it.
The coffee table, like I couldn't stand it. I hated it. Or like, depending on, it could go either way, right? Because you could either have something that's left to you from somebody that you really care about that you'll never let go of, or you could have something that's left to you there from somebody and you're just like, I can't stand. It's a constant reminder.
Yeah.
To me, the process of hating something like that is that you haven't gotten over your grief with that. And that, I mean, obviously, when you grieve somebody, a lost one, it's very hard to get over. Things that never are the same again after that, and it's just like, that is such a powerful thing. I think you said
it's the idea of like, it's hard to, there's acceptance, there's closure, there's like solace, there's a lot of different words that you can ascribe to not allowing those things to really impact you to the degree that they would in the immediate aftermath. But it is a process. It is a very difficult thing to overcome and kind of learn to live with. Mm-hmm. And it was just very like, in the moment when she was describing that, I was just like, wow, it's really like genuinely insightful for them to talk about. Which,
again, one of the biggest themes in this movie, grief, is a big part of that. Now that I know we jumped around a bit, but Isla's at the compound with them, and we start learning that Dr. Harbour is going to essentially probably die if he goes under again. He goes, "I need a cadaver." And
they're ready to ramp up the second discovery, and he's like, "Yeah, I need a body."
Yeah, and this actually to me is one of the funnier scenes, just mostly on Jesse Plemons' character. Just the distraction character. But essentially they go to a hospital and he's saying he's looking for his cousin. Nobody can find him. And he's just like trying to get him to go through all of the like people staying at the hospital. While the other two, he goes in to show them corpses to see, oh yeah, we had a John Doe. Maybe this is him. But as they're coming out, he keeps putting on the distraction while we see Isla and Will, which to me was something that, to go into what you were talking about, how they kind of build each other up and break each other's like things out. Like he even mentions like, oh yeah, stealing a corpse. This is not something like that I would ever see myself doing.
Mm-hmm.
They do go in. They have to find a specific death as well to make sure that the brain itself hasn't been damaged too much.
Yeah, which they don't. And again, this is one of the things that's like, I don't care about the ambiguity of it. They don't say like what they're looking for.
Yeah.
It's just they have a list, and one of the John Does fits it, and they're like, all right, this is our guy.
Yeah, they're reading their toe tags, and they like even unzip it and go, meet Pete.
Yeah, Pete Phillips.
Yeah. So they steal Mr. Phillips, steal him away from the hospital, and take him back to the compound, and get him all hooked up and ready to go. And it just seems like a failure at the time. I don't remember what had happened, but
they're looking to stimulate the brain to the point where they have something recordable to show for it, and they keep defibrillating the cadaver, but it gets to the point where Will says like, you have to stop, you're just going to fry the body, and then we're not going to be, we have to put it back.
Yeah.
So they ultimately, I think the power goes off too, and they call it a wash. They're like, all right.
I was trying to remember what happened, because afterwards he leaves, and it's basically just Will in there, and he starts to, he takes the panel off of the recording device, and then
so they ultimately they call it a wash, and afterwards, when no one's around, Will goes in. He like you said, he opens the panel for the machine, and he's kind of tinkering with it. And at first, I was like, oh, he sabotaged the machine so it wouldn't show anything. But he's like tinkering with it. He puts the plate back, and then he's like unplugging the things from the cadaver's head. Yeah, the electrodes, and that's when you get an image on the screen, a video on the screen, I should say, and it is apparently the second discovery. It's something showing some kind of evidence of what we can take as an afterlife.
But he does take this moment later. He kind of like downloads it, right? Puts it into like almost like an iPad.
It is an iPad. They use all Apple products.
Okay. I couldn't remember if it was or not.
Yeah, it's definitely a product placement movie.
Yeah,
they got a fat check from Apple.
Gotcha. He doesn't share this information with anybody.
No, he holds on to it, and you can tell it really it's getting to him.
And eventually, he shows Isla, and she's like, "Well, this means it's true, right?" Like they recognize something that's weird though, is they're seeing him drive. They're seeing it from his perspective, but the tattoo on his arm does not match the tattoo in the video.
Yeah, building up to that, because there's a little bit that goes into that too, is he recognizes
the hospital.
Yeah, because the scene that plays out that we can see as potentially the afterlife is Mr. Phillips is going into the hospital. He goes up to a door. A woman comes out, yells at him. He leaves, and that's it. So Will finds the hospital, tries to find the room.
Can't find the room.
But shadow of a doubt, he asks one of the janitors, like, did there used to be a hallway here? And he goes, yeah, they remodeled like 10 years ago. So shadow of a doubt, that room could have been there, but it's the overwhelming evidence versus definitive proof. There's no definitive proof. And then, they look at his tattoo, and it's different. So it's like, all right, something's going on here. And they ultimately decide they have to find the woman in the video to get some clarity on what's going on.
There is one thing I read that like it was kind of a goof for the movie. Whenever Isla and him looks at it, they talk about like the difference, and he's like, well, if it's supposed to be a memory, like that can't be right. But realistically, it's proven that like memories aren't fact. So that it shouldn't have been that strange to him that like definitively that can't be right, because memories, it's impossible for somebody to like exactly remember everything, because it is your perception of what happened, not what actually happened.
Yeah, that's why witness testimony is so unreliable in the courtroom setting. Like, it doesn't really, it holds weight, but like,
That's why there's so much heavily cross-examination whenever there is a witness testimony.
yeah, I mean, I this morning I literally was looking for a fork to eat breakfast and it was in my mouth. So that goes to show how reliable witness firsthand accounts are.
It's all right. I was watching TV before you came over, and I couldn't find the remote at all. And for some reason, I put it in my hoodie pocket. So I was walking around the house with the TV remote in my hoodie pocket
Where
looking
the
for it.
hell is this? Yeah, one of the things that I did I was really engaged with this movie. One of the things that was really interesting to me that I was anticipating they would play on is at one point Dr. Harbour talks about we need to stop thinking about life as having a beginning and an end. Life, whether as a human being living or as whatever we are afterwards, is just a long drawn out middle. And I kept thinking about how like what they were watching is probably like just it's kind of the first time where I started thinking about like, okay, maybe there is something like it's not a memory. Like it's probably something else because they set it up as like you're not supposed to think of life as a beginning or an end. It's just the middle part that kind of continues on. And that's where I was willing to accept and like go with the premise that like things are different and there's probably a reason why they're different, which really sets up eventually what we kind of come to discover. But as they're doing all their investigative work, our good friend Lacey is sowing discord amongst the compound.
Yeah, and she basically they find out that she's been telling people that they failed.
Mhm.
Like their experiment, it failed, it didn't work. And Dr. Harbour really does not take that lightly. Like, you're part of this inner circle, you're wearing a yellow jumpsuit because you have access to these experiments, and you're not supposed to be talking about them outside of people who are not wearing yellow jumpsuits. The only person that some reason gets any sort of like special treatment is Isla, who is, and I think it's just because of her close connection with Will at that point. But Dr. Harbour calls a meeting, like the big meeting of essentially it seems like the best minds there, and kind of just like really trounces Lacey and kind of just says like, you're gone. I can't trust you anymore.
Yeah, which
She says, don't lose faith in me. And he says something super powerful there. I'm trying to remember the quote, but
I have it. Yeah, I wrote it down because when he said that, I knew that was going to be a significant aspect of this. He says, faith is for those who have given up control on what they believe. And that's where he kind of, at that point is when I was like, all right, is this science versus like mysticism and like religion? Because there's again, the kind of dissonance and the contrast between they don't have definitive evidence. They have overwhelming evidence, which would lend to faith. Everyone has faith that what his discovery was true. But then in the same breath, he's absconding her for having faith in him, or generally the idea of faith.
I think he's getting to the point where he's saying like, I don't want you to have faith. We're finding this out, and I can't do that if you're going around telling everybody what's happening. Because if there ends up being like an uprising within the compound or something, and he can't get to his end results, it's a bigger problem for him.
Yeah. While we're still here, I want to bring up something because it reminded me of another film. Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, it kind of reminds me of two films. One that we talked about, There Will Be Blood. He brings her up on stage and he kind of is like humiliating her. Mm-hmm. And he goes, do you remember where I found you? And she's talking about like, you found me in the woods. And he's like, yeah. And what did you have with you? And she said, a gun. He's like, and what were you doing with the gun? She's like, I was pointing it at my chest. Obviously, we can, connect the dots there.
Yeah.
And we find out that she was affected by the discovery because she walked in to find her sister and her dad having given into the discovery. And she felt that she outright says something like, they went without me.
Mm-hmm. They didn't want me to go with them,
Yeah.
which also Midsummer.
Yep.
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 Yeah, we got there.
Yeah. That was exactly. As soon as they said that, I was like, "This is
Which
just like Midsummer."
to touch on that should be on the list. I don't know if it is or not. But
No, we don't. I don't think it is. But
one of my favorite things I've ever read on Letterboxd after I watched Midsummer was a review, and all the review stated was, "Imagine being left out of your family suicide."
Yeah.
I was like, Jesus.
I think I saw the same review, and that's I thought when she said that, I saw that in my head again. But yeah, there's this is where you start to see like the kind of real sinister underbelly of the compound itself. Like, it's kind of whatever. Like, it's weird, but it's a weird premise to begin with.
I want to touch on something else with like kind of a red flag for Lacey earlier as well. Overhearing just conversations she's had with people of like, at what point is somebody going to use this to not kill themselves but to start killing others?
Yeah.
And it's not. I didn't kill them. I just relocated them. I sent them to a better place.
Yeah, because it's such an for a movie to play on the own implications and morality of the concept it's setting forth was really refreshing, because that is like, you could make that argument within the logic and the like ethics of the movie itself. You are no longer a destructive force upon yourself or others. So the whole reason like we prosecute against things like murder, manslaughter, that is because you are contributing to the destruction of human life, which is a sacred thing that you cannot give back.
Yeah.
It is not a renewable resource. Once it's gone, it's gone. But if overwhelming evidence suggests that that's not the case, then is it really immoral and therefore potentially unlawful? I found that really interesting.
No, that's like, in general, one of the reasons I did want, like, this is a very thought-provoking movie.
Yeah, I was surprised. It has like a 50%.
I was going to talk about that too. I was going to kind of wait till the end, like, but yeah, it's I wrote that down. 46% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 54 out of 100 on Metacritic. But some of the reviews stated like this had such a good cast and had so much potential that people just felt it didn't deliver, which I don't agree with.
No, I don't either.
I guess every now and then, like, the conversations between Will and Isla sometimes, like, well, I said earlier, like, it does just feel like two people talking. And I think that's what people, like, kind of meant by it didn't deliver. Like, these are people that do have really good acting abilities, and there wasn't, like, any, like, overly big dramatic points where you're just like, man, they did such a good job at that part. But, like, the fact that it felt so natural also, that's not easy to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say as an actor, I'm not an actor, but like when I'm reading things off of a little script here to read like our intros and everything, like I don't feel like I'm talking naturally all the time.
Yeah.
So to do that with another person can't be the easiest thing. And it just seemed the conversation seemed so natural and the ideas flowed so easily, where it's just like us having a conversation. Well, what about that? And just respond. It's never like it didn't seem like a lot of acting was needed for it.
Yeah, I think I can see where general audience wouldn't connect with it because it's not sensational.
Yeah.
If you surmise the plot to someone, they probably would have an idea of how it would look, where there's a lot of probably very dramatic, over the top, like scenes of seeing these acts occur, and it being more of like an, I don't want to say an action movie, but there's like the call to action is more stopping people from doing this than it is like the main driving of the story being they're about to make another discovery.
Yeah, if they would have done it the way, like the latter way, or the former, sorry, we would have been seeing again the critically acclaimed film, The Happening 2. You never saw The Happening? M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening, where people just plants started setting out pheromones. It just made people kill themselves.
It sounds familiar, but no,
Yeah,
I
it
never
was a
saw
very
it.
bad movie. It wasn't
Oh, okay.
critically acclaimed. So I was trying to.
That's sorry. That's
Yeah,
my own.
just cut this, please, please, fucking cut this.
Nope.
Future Jordan,
Nope.
don't make me sound like an idiot.
Nope.
But no, I do agree. You don't go into this movie thinking that it's going to be a scientific kind of movie.
Yeah, it's just here's an idea. Let's deal with the implications of it, and then let's add a layer on top of it that makes it potentially worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, where were we?
So
Lacey
Lacey got kicked out,
got kicked out.
and then after a certain point, there, they do all their investigative work, and they figure out essentially that they're not watching a memory. What they've discovered from talking to they found out it was the man's sister, Mr. Peterson
Phillips.
Peter Phillips, Mr. Phillips' sister. And when they go and talk to like, well, what about the time he came to visit your father in the hospital? He never showed up.
Yeah.
So
She says, yeah, that man sure had some slick back hair.
real piece of shit.
Yeah. It's a nice little I think you should leave reference.
Yeah. But what his memories are trying to prove is that people can change.
Yeah. But yeah, like you were saying, they talked to the Phillips sister, and he never went to the hospital. He left her with a cancer-ridden father and a dementia-riddled mother. And then they asked, did he have tattoos? And she said, yeah, we got matching wave tattoos. So the tattoo he has currently matches the one he got with his sister, but in the recording, he does not have that.
It was like a tree or something instead. He had a different tattoo. And
yeah, I didn't really get a good look at it, but you were getting at
what they've come to figure out. It's not necessarily that they're replaying memories, but they're reliving moments of their life where they can try to make a difference and try to change it. Again, big key themes in this are regret, and that is what they were witnessing was Peter Phillips trying to go to the hospital to visit his dying father, but he gets turned away right at the door by his sister, which I think that's a very important part, because even though you get to relive these moments that may have been real big for you, moments that you've regretted, doesn't always mean that they're going to work out the way that you wanted them to.
Yeah, and I think even kind of staying with that, I'm sure that the Phillips sister also wanted that moment where she gets to tell him off for not being there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the clashing of worlds where however severe his regret was for not taking action, she also is kind of clashing with him and getting her moment where she gets to tell him off for not being there.
As they decide that they've now found definitive proof, they go to give this information to Dr. Harbour. But as we get there, we find out that he's put himself under again. He's like, he didn't have another body. He didn't want to put somebody else through it. So he himself went through it again, and they're trying to shut it down immediately to like make sure that he doesn't die. And then some footage comes up on the screen, and we get to see the brothers. They hear their mom's voice. It's from Dr. Harbour's perspective of he's working in his office, and mother knocks on the door and says like, hey, I made dinner. He's like, oh, I'm busy. Like, I got it. This is very important. What I'm working on is very important. And he goes to leave, or she leaves, shuts the door. And then out of nowhere, he comes back out, and she's on her way up the steps in his memory, where he says, you know what? It can wait. That's still going to be there tomorrow. Let's have dinner. And she turns back around and comes down the steps. And the brothers witness a world where their mother is still alive.
Yeah, which is like heart-wrenching. They Jesse and Jason do a really good job of portraying how heavy that moment would be,
how longing that they would be to have that life itself.
Yeah, that was really heavy.
Yeah, and then they realize how long it's been, and they say like we have to wake him up now. Like they realize themselves like, okay, we have to pull away from this. As much as we want this to exist, we have to pull away from this and let it leave. And that also makes it a lot heavier too, because they re-wake their dad up.
Mm.
And at this point, I did not know how the second part of this discovery would go originally. And like I'm actually, when I watched this the first and second time, like, oh God, like I didn't really remember how it went, but the father at this point, not wanting to make the same mistake twice, that says we have to destroy the machine.
Yeah,
This can't get out there.
yeah, he understands, because the idea that they talk about it, the dialogue is, it is not proof that you get to live another existence. Like you are not the person continuing life. You are essentially playing through all of the variables and variations that can occur within, like he mentions earlier, the drawn out middle of life. And if people have the understanding that they can continue to play back life until it becomes something that they don't have those regrets, or they get to play out everything as they want it to occur, that is catastrophic at that point. So yeah, they decide to destroy the machine. Before we get into the kind of climax of the movie, there's something we jumped over just a little bit, but is important for the ending of the movie.
Oh yeah,
When Isla and Will
return the body.
Yeah, they're having more conversation, and one of the things is Will finally discusses with Isla, I didn't lie when I was a child. I really did see something. And he even says, I returned to that beach because it gave me comfort to know that I really did see something, and that this was a physical, like tangible representation of that thing I saw. And then we also find out that Isla had a son, 5 years old. He died, not due to the discovery, obviously, but she says they were at the beach. She fell asleep for just a second, and he drowned. And that's where
That's also why she was trying to drown herself.
Yeah, in that specific beach.
Yeah.
So a lot of connections right there. But that's also when their romance kind of hits.
Really, yeah, got sparked.
Yeah. And then all of this. I just wanted to make sure we talked about that.
Yeah, because it is very important.
Yeah.
And on top of that too, like she said before in that, like I'm able to understand people's emotions, but I can't connect with them at all. This weird like serendipitous connection between this beach is like the only connection that she's actually made with another person. Also, it wasn't just, and I think this goes into what you're talking about with like inanimate objects, but also places.
Yeah.
Like they're connected through this beach in some way, which also helped her to have a better connection with this human being.
Yeah, it's part of you could see it as they're breaking each other down, but it's more productive than that. It's they're building each other up to him kind of accepting. He's probably the objective aspects of life through a scientific mindset are probably very comforting when you can't really make meaning of these horrible things that have occurred to you. And very similarly, she becomes walled off because of the tragedy that she has, to some degree, like she has been the cause of. It's horrible to say, but she accepts that if she had not fallen asleep, her child would still be alive. And they allow each other to get back to that point where they can connect and express and be vulnerable with each other.
Yeah.
It's very, through the tragedy becomes something. It's like, a flower only grows out of the mud.
Yeah. But we get Dr. Harbour calls a meeting outside. Does he explicitly state like, oh, it's a failure?
He basically is like, we've all reached a point where we have to accept like
that we don't know.
Yeah, and he basically calls it. He's just like, we're done, we're good.
Then we hear a gunshot, and we hear again the quote that was stated earlier. Like everybody's looking around, they see Lacey with the gun. She's like freaking out. She goes, "Oh, I didn't kill her. I just relocated her."
Mm-hmm.
And we cut and pan down, and Isla's been shot in the stomach.
Yeah,
It's very sad. she ends up dying right in Will's arms. It did not take long. I mean, gut shots usually happen pretty quickly.
Mm.
She passes. They're talking about how to kind of get rid of her body because they're in this unknown area. Like, they give her to a hospital at that point. Like, you got to call it in. Are they going to get in trouble for everything that's been going on there? Like,
Yeah.
kind of deal.
There's something I just realized too. When you said she gets shot in the stomach, when they're doing the questionnaire scene between Dr. Harbour and Isla.
That's where she says the soul is.
Yeah, one of the questions is, he asks, like, do you believe in a soul? If so, where do you believe it resides? And she says it's in the stomach, which he replies with, that's interesting. Most people say the brain, which is a very, if you kind of get into the idea of like mysticism or like various philosophies, Eastern versus Western, there's a very distinct difference between where people in the East and people in the West believe the soul reside. Typically in the East, they see it as the stomach, where in the West, we see it as the brain because we see it as like the thing that powers us.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of understand how people view that thing. But her getting shot in the gut,
Yeah,
kind of plays into that because that's where she says the soul resides. She gets shot in the gut. That's where she dies. So it's like she's directly impacted in the place that it would impact her the most.
yeah. I didn't think about that. That's an interesting point.
Yeah. Just as soon as you said gut shot, I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, hold on there.
Yeah.
But Will's very, very distraught. I mean, obviously, this was a love interest. They were sort of becoming a thing at this point. Even before like that happened, they were hugging because they were essentially proud that, hey, we did discover this thing, but we're glad it's not getting out there. This would only cause more of what's already been happening. At night, Will takes it upon himself he hooks himself. They didn't completely destroy the machine. And he hooks himself up to it to go replay that, to try to fix what had happened.
Yeah.
But when he does hook himself up to the machine and essentially put himself under, he pops back up on the ferry.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of really have I want to say kind of a weird, but I want to say enjoyable. The movie kind of takes a lot more of like a psychological take at this point, where he saved her from drowning herself multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been reliving the same memory loop of trying to save her life.
Yeah, everything that we have seen up to this point has been him being dead, is I think what you can get out of it.
Yeah, he has already been dead. He's been reliving it. But then she keeps dying regardless of what he does. And this is the first time that he finally was able to get her to stop herself from drowning, and she died a different way.
Yeah.
She kind of explains this to him, and it's weird because we can hear in the background too Dr. Harbour and Toby like trying to resuscitate him and trying to pull him back, but he does give in to the discovery ultimately, to where he then kind of pops up somewhere else. He's walking on the beach, and there's a little kid playing, and he goes in to get clams or something from the water, and he goes, "Oh, hold on, the tide's coming in, it's real strong," and he ends up saving this little kid. And he's talking to him like, where's your mother? Sorry, I do want to rewind real quick, because as they are trying to resuscitate him, he realizes that she's going to be going away, and he starts saying, I will remember you, I promise I will remember.
Mm-hmm.
So then as he saves this kid, he's like, oh, where's your parents, blah, blah, blah. And Isla comes running out from behind a little sand dune and was like saying to him, like, I told you can't keep running away from me. And he essentially is like, oh, he's okay, he just took a tumble, like, he's fine now. And ultimately, she kind of like doesn't really even like say thanks. It's kind of just like she looks at him weirdly. He kind of looks and he's like, no, he starts to walk away, but then he also turns, like, gets a sense of familiarity from her, and then turns around and follows.
Yeah, I also thought it was kind of like the way that scene was handled was a little strange, but then I also, like, if you're that parent in that situation, like, you're probably so full of adrenaline that all you can be like is, thank you, and then kind of like walk away. Like you,
It's also like you don't want your kids around strangers. Like,
yeah,
did this guy actually just save him, or was he like?
trying to take them.
Yeah, you're right. You know.
Yeah, yeah, and then yeah, like you said, she goes away, and then he kind of gets this moment of, I don't know if like lucidity is the right word, but like he
Clarity, maybe.
yeah, like
Yeah.
he clearly feels good about the deed he's done, and then something comes over him, and you see he kind of has like this mourningful disposition, because he probably does remember her, or like there is some familiarity, because you throughout the movie you're given the idea that you do the things that are familiar to you are most likely because you're replaying the memory, or you're going through that memory loop.
And
Um,
like it's an interesting thing too to maybe like think about again because there's a bit of ambiguity here. That couldn't have been a memory of his, like because he didn't witness her son drowning. He doesn't ever like, oh, I was there. Like he never brings that up. So that actually begs the question to me: is it something that you can control more than like the afterlife in that sense? Like he's been trying to save her throughout the entirety of his memory loops, but then somehow it dawned on him the true way to save her would be to save her son.
yeah,
So
yeah.
he forced himself somehow to be on the beach that day.
Yeah, which I can accept, because the way that they talk about how it works is like the variables and variations that
Mm-hmm.
occur, and like I guess if he's gone through, have you ever heard of the Shakespeare and the monkeys idea?
If you put a bunch of monkeys in a room, they could write Shakespeare after a while or whatever.
Yeah, it's just given enough time, you put a monkey at a typewriter, given trial and error over the course of infinity amount of years, it will produce something written by Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I can kind of see it similarly, where the the ever expanding nature of him being able to play back these and like go through all the subtle variations and variables of his lived experience through these memories, that he could end up at that beach at that
Mm-hmm.
time. It's not impossible, but yeah, it's very ambiguous.
Yeah, I didn't have an issue with it being a thing. To me, it's like it made me think more that they hadn't discovered enough about the discovery a second time.
Yeah,
Again, not necessarily something that you could control because apparently every time he relived this loop, he had forgotten who she was and then met her and fell in love with her. And he's just playing this out an infinite amount of time. Nothing up until this point, like he had never really tried to force himself to remember. And this time he did, but even it didn't pan out the way that he wanted it to. It was like, oh, I ended up in a different situation to save her, met her, and then was like, huh, she was familiar to me. At the end of this film, again, I really liked it. It kind of gave me more of a kind of like familiar with who the writer director Michael Gondry is.
not by name.
Eternal Sunshine, of Spotless Mind,
Oh, okay.
Science of Sleep.
Oh,
But
okay. Yeah.
it kind of gave me that kind of. It had a Michael Gondry twist on it at the end. To say it didn't remind me of a Michael Gondry film, but it had that like little twist of like, oh, there is something you can control in this weird world that you live in.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think this is a pretty impactful movie. Like especially if you do like the questions of existentialism. Like if you are able to stomach and talk about tougher topics like death, suicide, grief, regret, loss, it's a very good film.
Yeah. My biggest gripes with the movie aren't with the subject matter or the vessel through which it's delivered. Most of my biggest gripes kind of come from cinematography.
Sweaters getting wet.
Well, yeah. I mean, on countless sweaters were lost in the making. They should do that for like how they're like no animals were harmed in it. They should do like a clothing warning where it's like no sweaters were harmed in the making of this movie.
They should have a ticker in the movie of how many times that sweater was ruined going into the ocean to save her.
Yeah, that was countless, honestly.
Yeah,
Man,
infinitesimal.
that's so sad.
What you were saying is cinematography. Sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah,
to.
yeah, that I think that was my biggest gripe is, and it makes sense from if you're the director or the cinematographer trying to communicate the the feelings of the characters, the decisions they made make sense. I don't like them. One of the things you see a lot of that and this isn't just with this movie, it bugs me with a lot of movies, is there's a lot of shots where the characters are in focus and then everything around them is extremely distorted and like off, and it's meant to give that kind of like tunnel vision. Obviously the idea that you're trying to communicate is there's like some weird like distortion or like there's some unease. It's kind of like at one point there's a shot of Will walking in like a field. I think he's going to the beach and it's like a Dutch angle, so it's already kind of meant to make you feel off put, and then he is in focus and everything else is like kind of like distorted. I just really don't like that, and I don't like how it looks, and I think they had a lot of the environment that they were shooting in is really like beautiful. It's very serene.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would have like the contrast between such a heavy subject matter and like a very serene place would have maybe worked better, but that's a personal gripe with me.
Quick question based off of that, but also after having finished the movie, do you think that those shots where things are kind of like out of focus and distorted could also just be a play on like the idea that your memory is not?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I accept it.
Yeah.
I understand that the reason like it is purposeful. I just, from a viewer's standpoint, don't prefer that style.
And it only becomes purposeful if you watch it a second time and you're picking up on it more, and you're like, oh, well, that makes sense because again, when you're having a memory, your focal point is on what you remember and not the things around what you remember.
Yeah, like I said, I accept it.
Yeah.
It's personal preference. It doesn't take away from the movie, but that's like the biggest gripe I have.
All in all, for those of you who did sit through this, if this is something that does interest you, definitely give this movie a watch.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say I lied, but because technically this was the first time I've seen this.
Okay.
I attempted to watch it, I think when it first came out, and I watched like the first 10 minutes of it, and I don't know why, but I turned it off. And I think I was just like, I'll watch this at some other point. And I going into like basically just reading the synopsis on Netflix, I was like, this sounds very interesting, and then it was a lot more engaging than I remember it being, and then also than I anticipated it. So I'd highly recommend it.
I think the last time I watched this, I recommended it to you, and that may have been around that time too.
Yeah, that could have been it.
But yeah, it's, again, I'm not going to say I recommend it again because I already said that 3 times.
Yeah.
But I recommend
Third time's
it.
the charm.
I recommend it.
Yeah. All right.
On that note,
episode 4, The Discovery. Stick around. Next time, we'll talk about...
If you remember.
If you remember, we'll be talking about something. We'll figure that one out. But until then, later.
Deuces.